Attacks? I thought you said attack. We can't afford miscommunication like this if there's going to be attacks. Not in this action economy. Hello, and welcome to Action Surge, the series where we take an in-depth look at your turn in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Today, we are going to be looking at the attack action. Now, the attack action is used whenever you are physically waylaying your opponent. Whether you are using a sword, axe, bow, your fist, a claw, anything that is you physically attacking your opponent is the attack action. Before we go ahead and take a look at our mechanics of this action, I do want to point out one bit of clarification that players tend to get confused on. There is a difference between the attack action and an attack roll. An attack roll is what you do whenever you are trying to harm an enemy with an attack. However, not all attack rolls are attack actions. Notably, the cast a spell action, which we will be talking about later in the series, may involve you making one or more attack rolls. These are not the same thing. This is important to clarify because there are certain classes, such as the fighter or barbarian, that get the extra attack feature. The extra attack feature allows you to make multiple attacks when you take the attack action. Those multiple attacks are limited to attacks that you would make with the attack action, such as with a sword, a bow, or your fist. They do not allow you to cast multiple spells, despite the fact that spells may use an attack roll. They use a different action, the cast a spell action. So as long as you can keep attack action and attack roll separate, you are going to save yourself so much heartache. Now with that out of the way, let's head over to the core mechanics of the attack action. As stated, the most common action to take in combat is the attack action, whether you are swinging a sword, firing an arrow from a bow, or brawling with your fists. With this action, you may make one melee or ranged attack. Going a step deeper into the rules for making an attack, you will do 3 things. 1, you will choose a target. 2, you will determine modifiers. And 3, you will resolve the attack. When you choose a target, you pick a target within your attack's range, a creature, an object, or a location. The DM then determines whether the target has cover or whether you have advantage or disadvantage against the target. In addition, spells, special abilities, and other effects can apply penalties or bonuses to your attack roll. You make the attack roll. On a hit, you roll damage unless the particular attack has rules that specify otherwise. Some attacks cause special effects in addition to or instead of damage. The attack roll is a d20 roll to see if you hit the target, commonly referred to as the 2-hit roll. With few exceptions, all attack rolls will get to add one of your ability modifiers. If you are using a melee weapon, you can always add your strength modifier. If the weapon has the finesse property, you may choose to add your dexterity modifier instead. Ranged weapons add your dexterity modifier to any attack roll. Notably, thrown weapons such as daggers or hand axes follow the same rules as their melee use. In addition to the ability modifier, you will also get to add your proficiency bonus if you are proficient with the weapon you are using. In combat, the number you roll on the d20 can have special significance before you add anything to it. Sometimes, fate blesses or curses a combatant, causing the novice to hit or the veteran to miss. If the d20 roll for an attack is a 20, the attack hits regardless of any modifiers or the target's AC. This is called a critical hit, which is explained later in the game. This is colloquially known as a crit, a natural 20, or a nat 20. If the d20 roll for an attack is a 1, the attack misses regardless of any modifiers or the target's armor class. This is colloquially known as a fumble, a natural 1, or a nat 1. There are additional rules surrounding attack rolls that we won't get into here. If you're curious though, I have provided a list on the screen for further research into other special types of melee attacks, the qualifications of ranged attacks, or things such as cover. Now that we understand how the attack action works, let's go ahead and look at when to use it. Now this is a very broad topic, The attack action is going to be one of the most common actions used in your entire campaign of D&D. Pretty much anytime you're in combat and you want to kill the other person, you're pretty much going to want to be doing this. You don't have to kill with the attack action though. If you are making a melee attack and you drop someone to 0 hit points, you can actually knock them unconscious. With how often you are going to be using the attack action, it might actually be more useful for us to talk about when not to use the attack action. The attack action should not be used mainly when you are casting a spell, as we discussed earlier, or if your party members are attempting to negotiate with the enemy. Now, you may find yourself wanting to attack on your turn, even though the bard or the paladin of your party has already begun trying to negotiate with the enemy. Whether this is trying to talk them out of fighting you, whether this is trying to intimidate them into submission, or if they're trying to deceive the enemy to think that you're on the same side, if you attack on your turn, you may not be doing your friend any favors. Because a round of combat all happens at the same time, if your companion uses their turn to try to negotiate with the enemy, and then you use your turn to attack the enemy, when it's the enemy's turn, they have to decide whether they want to talk things out and possibly be safe, or deal with the person actively attacking them. Depending on the situation, continuing to attack may help with your intimidation tactics. However, most of the time, you may find that the enemy is more concerned with their own safety, and if you are constantly aggressing, they may not want to listen to your companion speak. Outside of the casting a spell action, or when you have the circumstance of your companions trying to talk to the enemy, most of the time, if you are a martial character, you are going to want to take the attack action. Attacking with style. The way you describe how your character attacks is going to put a lot of legwork into understanding who they are in a combat situation. Whether they are a nimble swashbuckler dancing around the battlefield, quickly getting in attacks, or if they are an overbearing opponent that just powers through their enemy's defenses, the way you describe your attacks is going to show throughout the game. You're going to be taking the attack action a lot, so I encourage you to have a little fun with it. Whether your character is a trained martial artist that can go through multiple different animal-based fighting styles, or if they have a very strict militaristic way of training that carries them through the game, the way you describe the way your character attacks will do wonders. With this though, there's multiple facets that you can use to help pace yourself in your descriptions. It's very difficult to start a combat always swinging for the headshot to then have nowhere to go from there. Part of understanding your attacks is understanding the different parts of an attack action, as well as then other things like hit points. For an attack action, you're going to roll your d20 to hit to see if you hit, and then you're going to roll damage if you do so. This combined with hit points is going to tell most of the story for you. When you describe what your character is doing with their attack action, phrase it as intentions, what you are trying to do, how you are feeling. If you currently have low hit points, maybe describe how you are wounded or if you are winded or something like that. As you then go in with your description of the demeanor of your attack, you then get to make your to hit roll. If you hit or miss, that will determine whether or not you do your damage roll. If you miss, you immediately can describe how you miss, or likely the game master will describe how you miss. Depends on your relationship with them. If you do roll damage though, that is another thing to consider. After finding out that you rolled 10 points of damage on an attack, let's compare that to the enemy you're fighting. If you're fighting an orc that has 15 hit points, 10 damage is a lot of damage, and you've likely stabbed them in the chest, hacked into their arm, or done some other major form of damage. On the other end, if you happen to be fighting a cloud giant with 200 hit points, those first 10 points of damage aren't going to be much. Within D&D, hit points symbolize so much more than physical health. They examine luck. They look into your current morale status, what your will to fight is like. It's really not until you get to about half of your hit point maximum that we really consider you to be hitting the enemy in general. Taking a term from 4th edition D&D, I use the term bloodied to let my players know if they have reached the halfway point of the monster's hit points. This gives them more liberty to describe how they're attacking and how they're damaging. After we whittle those hit points down past bloodied, down to about a quarter, down to about 10%, all of these blows build and build and build in how much damage they can do. By having a shorthand means of understanding where you are in the combat with your game master, that will allow you to better describe the types of attacks you're doing. A lot of the attacks at the beginning of the combat are going to be tiring your opponent out, where the attacks at the end of the combat are going to start to score those body hits and possibly even something fatal. After you've understood all of the different ways that you can damage your opponent, you might want to think about other weapons your character might use. Yes, you have your ancestral greatsword, you have the bow that has been handed down through ages and lineages of elves. Having a special weapon is great. However, if you have a few different weapons that either your character has on them at any given time, or if you are willing to examine your character going from different fighting styles throughout a campaign, that gives you even more flourish and style that you can add to the story as your character develops. If you transition from weapon to weapon to weapon throughout a long campaign, that will not only allow you differences in combat, but that will also use combat as a signifier for different areas of character growth. Perhaps your character starts off with something like a hammer or a great club, and they're just bashing their way through everything. Perhaps after they fight something like a troll that they simply cannot bash down, it continues to stand up, your character might then start to discover other implements, go through different tactics of how they want to learn how to be a better combatant. Keep in mind that as your character levels up, you are going to be gaining in skill. It is okay for your character to start off with very sloppy descriptions of what their fighting style looks like, because chances are they're going to develop as the story continues. The way you describe your character's fighting is going to be different than everyone else at the table because you're playing different characters. They don't have to all match as if you are one singular fighting unit. Even soldiers in a phalanx formation fight differently. The individuals in the front with the shields fight differently than the polearms behind. If you have an archer farther behind that, you have a bunch of martial-based characters, but they're all fighting differently, and I welcome you to describe 1,000 different ways that you want to see the battle going, and from there, develop the narrative of your character's story. There's so much that you can do with the attack action. A lot of it just comes down to understanding the story you are trying to tell. The important part of this is whether you are just telling the story or you are trying to do something effective. We did cover very shortly in the mechanics that there are other types of attacks besides attacking to damage. You can attack to shove, to grapple, all these sorts of things. Feel free and use those as descriptions in the middle of your attack rolls, as long as you're not trying to get an additional benefit. You can easily shield bash an opponent to open up their side to stab them with your short sword, as long as you understand that that shield bash may not be knocking them back. You can easily grapple an opponent and start kneeing them. However, as long as you're not trying to maintain that opponent in a grappled condition, you can just describe that as happening and then move on. A big part of understanding the narrative of the attack action is understanding what you are trying to do and informing the dungeon master, I want to do X, what do I need to roll? And then after you know what to roll, you can describe it in whatever means you want. The mechanics that you are attempting to do can be very different than the story you are attempting to do. And it is the combination of the mechanic and the story you are adding that is going to make your turn just taking the attack action, one of the most common actions in the game, and turn it into something unique for you and your table. And with that, we have finished our episode on the attack action. We have discussed how to use it, when to use it / when not to use it, and how to better make it your character's style when they are attacking. Next week, we're going to be picking up on another very broad action, the cast a spell action. Stow that bow, sheathe that sword, and let's get out those wands, magic orbs, and a little bit of back guano as we transition from fighting into magic. I hope you'll join me.